And we're live? Okay, great, thank you. Welcome everybody to the first Finance Committee meeting for the budget 2023-2024 process. I think we usually start with a land acknowledgement, is that correct? I'll do it since I don't know. Anyway, so since this is a public meeting and we're live streaming it, we do want to acknowledge that there were folks who came long before us and were stewards of the land and of this place that we all love and hold so dear. So I want to start this meeting by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territories of all of the Treaty 7 nations, the Iahé Nakota, the Blackfoot Confederacy, and the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Métis Region 3. And we are all committed to truth and reconciliation and working together to acknowledge the history and to chart a better future for ourselves and for our neighbors especially, and for those who came before us. So because we are all treaty people, really want to start with that kind of acknowledgement. And then before we start today, we need council to approve the Finance Committee meeting agenda. Does anybody have any changes to that agenda? Seeing none, I'll ask council if you can vote to approve this agenda. And it's unanimous. Great. So welcome, council, to this first Finance Committee meeting. All the mics are on open mic, so you can push your microphone and talk at any time. We do need people to talk into the microphone so that the councilors who are live streaming and Pelkey and the viewing public can hear what you say. I will be chairing the meeting, but especially when I'm presenting, I just want to say to those who are attending virtually, I might miss your hand raise or not see you. So anybody in the room who sees that they're trying to jump in, just let me know, or feel free to just interrupt whenever you have a question. So today's the beginning of what's been a long journey, as staff have been working on the budget since July. Just for a bit of perspective, since the regular business meeting in July, where council gave us budget direction. The finance department then started working with managers and supervisors to create draft budgets, 2023 and 2024 operating, plus a 25 and 26 operating plan and a 6-year capital budget. So that was about 2.5 months of work for managers and supervisors. And then there's a real quick couple of weeks where GMs do reviews and finalize all those budgets. And then starting in late September, going through yesterday, CST and Rick in finance and Pelkey in finance and Robin in communication have all been sitting in the same room for a lot of hours, working through the budget, moving things around, making changes, figuring out a structure to get to this moment. So, you know, when we think about town resources, this process to get to this point where we're now turning the draft budget over to council for discussion is really long and really resource intensive. And there's still a lot of work to do to get it over the final stages, but I did want to start by acknowledging everybody who's been part of the process to get us to this moment. It's a lot of work, and we've done a few different and what I think were interesting things this year. That I'm going to walk you through in a minute, that even I think have led to a better process, but also created a bit more work. So it really has been an adventure since July. So we're happy to be here walking you through it. Today we're going to start by talking about your 2023 to 2026 strategic plan and what we've done to align the budget with that plan. Then there was a motion made earlier this year around looking at provincial downloading as part of the budget. We'll walk you through that. And then Therese and Pelkey are going to do the high-level overview starting point for the budget. So that's what we're going to try to accomplish today. When we meet on Thursday, GMs will walk you through department by department the operating budget. So today will be mostly high-level overviews. I do have a presentation that I'm going to start in a minute, but again, just want you to feel free to jump in and ask a question at any time as you have them. Okay? Anything else before we start? Anything I've missed? Okay, you guys jump in too if there's anything I've forgotten or don't have quite right. Go ahead, Tanya.
Would any handouts that are for council, could you put them in my mailbox, please?
Yes, councillors Graham and Faubert. We will put today we'll give the handouts for Thursday's meeting, so we can either drop them off to you or put them in your mail slot. Just let us know what you prefer. But you bet. More reading. Okay, Robin, could you put the presentation up? Thank you. All right, so we're going to start by talking about your 2023 to 2026 strategic plan and the implementation. So if you go to tab 2 of your binders, or if you're watching online, the very first agenda item is an implementation plan for Council's strategic plan. And so I want to just start by talking about how we got here. This is not something that we've ever done before that I can recall in my time with the town in terms of the budget process. So it's something a little bit new and different. And we welcome your feedback and input. And Tanya and Wade, I can no longer really see you. So again, if you have a question, please just interject. And I welcome you to do that at any time. You don't have to wait till I stop talking. So in terms of how we got here to this implementation plan. So after the election and the 2022 budget approval, and those of you who have just completed your first 1 year on council will remember 1 year ago where we were sitting and meeting and going through the budget for the first time. In the new year, we worked with a consultant from a company called It's Logical, and we spent 3 days with you developing your 2023 to 2026 strategic plan. You, during that time, developed a vision, 3 goals around livability, environment, and relationships. You looked at the foundational pillars of financial stewardship, human resources, and community engagement, and you created 3 to 4 key results that you want to see in each of those goals and foundational pillars. And just as a reminder, this image is the framework or the visual that the consultant used. And when we were doing that strategic plan work, we were really at the top of the pyramid, looking at a community vision and creating council's strategic plan. And then it led to the document that you have in your binder that we've been working from. And then you created a motion 136 that you direct us to return in the fall. When you approved the strategic plan, you asked that we come back with ideas for bold initiatives that address livability and environment in Canmore, including but not limited to increasing income appropriate housing and affordability. So administration has been working around that motion, and we decided if we were already going to look at ideas for livability and environment, we might as well expand it to the whole strategic plan, since we need to come up with plans for the whole thing. So we just did all of the plan, not just specifically those 2. And then what was really new for the town of Canmore, we really liked this image from It's Logical in terms of thinking about the work. And what we'd never really done before is a corporate business plan. And in some ways, that's what we're suggesting this implementation plan is more of a corporate business plan. So we decided we wanted to do something a little bit different. The way the budget is set up is very department heavy, and department managers all go off and work with their teams and work in isolation on the budget. And there's a certain amount of that just has to happen because that's the structure of how things work. But we wanted to facilitate a bit more collaboration, a bit more working together, and a bit more thinking about things outside of the silos of departments and structure it around council's goals and desired results. So we started to do some corporate business planning, which again is something that was new for us at the town, something we'd never done before. It was an attempt to take a collective look at our work and at council's goals. And so we created an inventory of what we're already doing that moves us towards those goals. We generated options of things that we could do. What are people's ideas or suggestions? Or are you all right, Mayor Cressett? Do you need to walk?
That was an alarm. Oh. It's an SOS alarm.
Oh.
That I don't know why it came on.
Okay.
So,
You're
right.
okay?
As you were.
Okay. Okay. We generated options of things we could do, and we asked questions of everybody to make sure that whatever we were suggesting we could do is something that we could actually measure so that we could report on it someday. And I have on the computer, if you want to see it, we did a spreadsheet and that we sent out to all managers. And what ended up happening was actually really, I think, pretty great. Most managers had meetings with their entire team and talked about each of council's goals and the foundational pillars and the results, and created an inventory of what we already do that move those things forward and what ideas they have. And those ideas might have been in their own department or a way they could partner with another department, but many staff at all levels of the organization were looking at generating what we might do to respond to council's strategic plan. So it created some really good conversations and awareness of council's strategic plan throughout the organization. And then we had CST led 3 different workshops with managers in this room, actually, And in April, we looked at livability, and in May, we looked at environment, and in June, we looked at relationships and the foundational pillars. And the spreadsheet that was shared throughout the organization and everyone populated, we covered all the walls in flip charts and sticky notes. We took everything from those spreadsheets and put them up on the wall. And then we started to work through them about asking questions about, making sure everybody was clear what we were talking about, identifying what would be bold, and actually move things forward, what things were great ideas that the municipality can't actually do, either because it's not legal in Alberta or it's not our jurisdiction, or, people came up with some great ideas that we just can't implement. But we got really clear on what we could do and what would actually be bold and high impact that helped move council's strategic plan forward. And then in doing that, we had to spend a good bit of time actually defining what bold means. Because when you say to people, well, pick out the actions identified here that you think are bold, everyone says, well, what does bold mean? And instead of getting mired down in trying to define bold, we tried to just be really clear about what it was and what it was not. So we talked about bold as something that requires courage or political will in the face of barriers or oppositions, that it is beyond the limits of conventional thought or action, and that it's not for its own sake. You're not being bold just because you can be bold, that it is on behalf of something larger, that there's a big benefit to the community, as in council's vision, goal, and results, and what we're doing is trying to make meaningful movement towards that, and that sometimes that meaningful movement might be difficult, but that we weren't afraid because it might be difficult. So from there, we took all those actions that we thought were bold, and we worked to create the draft implementation plan that's in your binder. And I do really want to highlight that it's draft. We generated a list of high impact actions that we thought would move the needle on council's goals. We assigned a lead department for each of those, and then a bunch of collaborators. So instead of, again, just having one department go off and say, this is what we're going to do, we recognized many departments often need to be involved in moving things forward, and we wanted to condition the work to make sure that we were planning for all of the resource impacts, both human and financial. So if every department came up with an idea that needed communication, as an example, to do advertising and marketing, the communication department needed to be aware of those things when they were doing their work plan for the year. So we really worked to have collaborative conversations about what things we were going to put in this plan and who needed to be involved. And then managers worked together to create a potential implementation year, and that's how we created the draft plan that's in your binder. So what I want to start with this morning is just walking you through that plan and what's in there and how it will work through this, how we'd like it to work through this budget process. So there are some things in this draft implementation plan that we've incorporated into the budget where possible, because it meets the definition of when you gave us budget direction in July. It might be part of status quo, it might be a new demand for growth, or it's something that we were already doing that helps meet the goals and results that you're looking for. And then we have a list of unfunded options, kind of an a la carte menu for council's consideration. And in the plan, you'll see we've suggested years when we think we can do it, but that's all up for discussion and consideration. So we're not asking you to comment on any of the options today. I'm just going to go through them at a very high level. When the GMs walk through operating and capital budgets, they will flag for you and speak with detail to the things that we've identified as options. And then once we get to the part of the finance committee meetings where there's council deliberation, that's really, we'll do a high-level summary of what all the options were for you one more time, and then you can start to give us direction on what you'd like to see brought into the budget, at what time, and in what way. So today's really the first intro to the options. There'll be more detail coming. Oh, thank you. And then there'll be, sure, thanks. Then there'll be an opportunity for you to discuss and debate them as we go. So this is then the last part of the chart from It's Logical. After we did that corporate business planning, then departments went and looked at the work in their business units and created budgets, which is what we're here for the month to discuss. And there's still a bit to come on this draft implementation plan. So we still need to go through, as I mentioned, when we were first doing the inventory, there's a bunch of things that we are already doing that we need to add into this plan, and we haven't had time to thoroughly go through that inventory and make sure that they're all there. We're also, thanks to Councillor McCallum, we've been connected to a local expert in organizational measurement, and CST has 2 workshops with him in December, where he's going to really help us determine how we will actually be able to measure and report back to you on the results from this implementation plan linked to your strat plan. So what you have in front of you today as this draft implementation plan will change, but it's our plan to put some measurement elements to it and to bring it to you for approval in Q1 of 2023. So for now, it's in binder. It's in your binder under tab 2. It's the second document, and the more details are coming. So with that, we can start. The first component is how we will implement livability. And as a reminder, your livability goal is that Canmore is a place where all residents can thrive. So the first result is that municipal initiatives and services are designed to increase affordability for residents. And one of the actions is around, as your motion requested, expanding housing, to investigate increasing housing stock, regulation of occupant type, and different models of provision of housing. So some of the potential ideas that we've explored as part of the budget process include increasing the CCH capacity stock and mandate. That is something that is ongoing, and with Council's new appointments to the CCH board, that's probably the best way to achieve that in the short term. So there's no budget implications for that, but there might be down the road. That we would look at staff accommodation for Town of Canmore employees and
Sally?
Go ahead, yeah.
There's something missing in these handouts.
Uh-oh.
So result 1 starts there, but it goes straight to the increased participation in affordable services. None of the housing stuff is in here.
Okay, that's a printing error
but it
on
is
my
here.
fault, but it's in your,
Yep.
yeah, so it might be better to follow along, for those of you following along, on the implementation plan, and we'll figure out the handout error. My apologies. Thank you. This is what my presentation is exactly copy pasted from the implementation plan that's in the binder and in the agenda. Okay. The third option is a mortgage helper program for town employees. HR and finance have that in their work plan for 2025. So there's no budget ask at this time, but it's something we'll be working to research and bring back to you. Housing intensification downtown. This is included in the downtown area redevelopment plan capital project. There's a project at looking at what we could do potentially above parking lots or those kinds of things will be incorporated already into that work. And that capital project is already approved. That's just basically an add-in to that project. No budget requirements at this time. And then provide additional congregate living opportunities. This is something Mayor Krausert has been researching, Happy Pad. So when Scott does his overview of the Economic Development Department, he'll speak to this option where you could fund in the operating budget through the ECDEV reserve, inviting Happy Pad into town. So more to come on that. So that's where we're at with result 1. The first element under result 1. In addition, there is increasing participation in the Affordable Services Program. So also unfunded in the Community Social Development budget will be an option to make some changes to the Affordable Services Program. That'll be an option for council to consider as part of the budget, and Scott will be bringing that forward Thursday. Oops. The second option is conversion of the Safe Park pilot to a permanent program. So recently, a staff member from CSD was in front of council giving you an update on that. We've had 2 years of the pilot for the Safe Park program. Continuing that program is not currently in the budget because it was a pilot. So if council wants that program to continue, we'll need to add that into the budget. And again, Scott will speak to that option. Go ahead.
And when Scott speaks to the option, he'll provide the estimated amounts for that?
He sure will.
Thank you, Scott.
For every option, every option that we walk through today, when GMs talk about their departments, they'll get into specific details of the program and dollar amounts. So this is really just a high-level overview. Result 2 under your livability goal is that emergency management communication is affected and adopted across the community. So one of the ideas that's been talked about is implementing an emergency alert notification system. Protective Services has an option for that Scott will speak to. And then developing winter and summer emergency response plans for unsheltered individuals. That's also an option in the operating budget that Protective Services and CSD are collaborating on that council could look at funding. Result number 3, municipal programs, facilities, and services help to attract and retain families and support community diversity. So one of the things we're working on administratively is really looking at systemic discrimination and understanding how it plays a role in our organization, not because we are aware of, certainly there are issues around that. They're in every institution. We don't have big glaring issues that we're aware of, but we are earnest and really wanting to be thoughtful and well-educated about what we can do to be a better organization for all of our staff and for the community. So funded we're already doing some work on this. Right now we have a reconciliation, equity, diversity, and inclusion consultant who's doing a systemic analysis of the organization. So in the capital budget is a small project to, once we get the results of that study, we want to be able to implement some of the suggestions. So this is an option that is currently funded in the capital budget. Certainly council could make a change to it, but it's not unfunded at this time. And then increasing accessibility in the town facilities. The facilities department in the capital budget also has a project, an accessibility audit that we have funded in the capital budget. Then Whitney will speak more to that when we get to capital budget, which isn't until next week. But that's a way to increase and support diversity in our town facilities. And then we also want to examine the possibility for universal washrooms in town facilities. So that's a capital budget item in facilities to look at what it would mean to convert current washrooms and also to create a policy going forward anytime there's a new build about the types of washrooms we install. And in the interim, we do have an initiative to put inclusive signage on all of our existing washrooms, just making it clear that people can make choice, given that not all, but most of our washrooms indicate currently a gender, that there are people for whom that binary choice doesn't fit, and we're working to put up signage that lets people know that they can use the ones that are most fitting for their personal preference. Under the same result, we also have an option to create free or low-cost problems that provide alternative childcare. That would be a CSD project through the Family Connection Center that is currently unfunded. And Scott will speak to that option in his budget presentation. And then another idea is to increase free outdoor activities and spaces. So there's an unfunded option in the Public Works budget for restoring an outdoor ice surface in the Three Sisters area. You may recall that during the pandemic, there was an ice surface created up in Three Sisters that was created through pandemic funding. It's not part of the operating budget. So that's something that Whitney will speak to in her presentation. And then there are unfunded capital projects in Public Works for vault washrooms at the Fitzgerald Rise Playground, a new dog park at Spring Creek, and a jumping platform at Quarry Lake. All of those things support free outdoor activities and options, and we'll speak more to those in the operating and capital budgets. And then result number 4 is that employment opportunities provide residents with a dignified and reasonable standard of living are widely available. So Eleanor McClett, our Manager of Economic Development, is currently doing a labor market strategy, retention, and attraction study. And so there are no budget implications yet for implementing that study, but there might be more to come that will help with this result. And then identifying opportunities to reduce the living wage for the town as an employer. And same thing, once that labor market study is complete, we'll look at implementation. We also have a compensation project that's coming that might help with that. But we wanted you to know that we are flagging it as one way to reach that result. So those are the big items under livability. Any questions before I move on to environment? Okay, the second goal under your strategic plan is around environment. Canmore is a recognized leader in managing human impact on the environment. This first result is around wildlife encounters within our urban footprint being reduced, and unauthorized human use and wildlife corridors is also similarly reduced. That was your first result. So one of the things that council's already started to do, in fact, Mayor Krausert and Councillor Graham and I attended a meeting at Alberta Municipalities around advocating for wildlife fencing on the Trans-Canada Highway through Canmore. I will say a lot of what staff came up with when we were brainstorming were things for council to lobby the province on. We didn't include all of them in the plan because there are a lot, and you're already doing a lot of that advocacy work. But a lot of where we're restricted in being bold are the limits of the Municipal Government Act. Anyway, that's one thing we'll continue to work with you to advocate on. Then we also want to continue to collaborate with the Biosphere Institute on increasing education and enforcement through collaboration with the province. So as you know, we give a good sum of money in support of the Biosphere and the great work that they do. A little over $170,000, I believe, this year was our funding for them. And we're realizing as we're working on business transformation and process improvements that we don't have, there are many organizations that we give money to, but we don't actually put many formal agreements in place where we have a shared understanding of what that money is going for, and that we're making sure that the work that they're doing links back to council's strategic plan and priorities. So we do have that with TCK, and we're going to use that TCK model to begin to implement that with other organizations. And we thought this year we would start with the Biosphere. One, because there are a significant number of goals and results for council under environment. And two, because we give the Biosphere a significant amount of money. And three, because we really want that. It is a strong partnership and we want to keep it that way. So we're going to work with them to ensure that we have consistent outcomes and a shared understanding as they implement their projects and services with the money that we give. So more to come on that. And then we'll create a town action plan from the Human Wildlife Roundtable recommendations. So that Human Wildlife Roundtable happened a few years ago, and there are several recommendations in there for the town of Canmore. But no real action plan of what we're going to implement when, what the costs to implement it are. Right now it's largely theoretical. So there's a funded project in the Public Works capital budget to create an action plan and then a funding plan for that implementation, all part of the capital budget. And Whitney will speak to that when we get to the capital budget days next week. Under the same result, one of your other one of our suggested actions is to actively remove plants on town lands known to be wildlife attractants, including replacement of plants to maintain natural areas and tree canopy. This is funded already in accordance with the current practice in the proposed Public Works operating budget. So that is something we have been doing, but are turning an eye to the level to which we're able to implement that. And Whitney will speak more about that in the Public Works operating budget. Another option would be to, if we increase the funding, of course, we could escalate the pace of that program, right? So we can do as much as we're funded to do in any given year. And then another option would be to increase the removal of feral rabbits. So two different things here. One is the parks operating budget contains funds to rabbit-proof elevation place in 2025. That's an area right now where we're seeing a lot of rabbit activity. And then we could also increase the amount we give every year to the feral rabbit removal program. And Scott will speak to that in the protective services budget. Again, we can tackle more rabbits. The more money we have, the more we can do. But there's decisions for council to make around how much you want to do of all these things. For under environment, result number 2, Canmore as a community collaborates to reduce our impact on climate change and to prepare for climate action. So in the Public Works capital budget, we have a lot of different climate-related plans. There's the Climate Emergency Action Plan. There's the Environment and Sustainability Action Plan. There's the Climate Adaptation Plan. So the idea is to roll that all into, the first one is the Consolidated Climate Emergency Action Plan. To take all of our various climate and sustainability programs and to wrap them into one with funding and a clear plan for the next 4 years. So Whitney will speak to that in Public Works Capital. And then energy retrofits for residents through a GHG reduction program that's funded in the 2024 operating budget, again, through the Sustainability Reserve, which Whitney will speak to. And then result number 3, the community is aware of the town of Canmore's environmental leadership. So we are, as you know, we already have many solar arrays throughout town. One unfunded project in the capital budget would be to put more solar panels on the salt shed in Elk Run. It's one of the few facilities we have left with solar potential that doesn't have it yet. And then to be explicit about how the organization's actions and initiatives demonstrate environmental leadership. So we believe we can do some of that through the agreement with the Biosphere Institute that I just previously spoke to. And communication has a new position proposed in the 2025 budget that Therese will speak to. And that this would be part of that workload, is to create an intentional campaign linking our actions and initiatives with our environmental leadership so that more members of the community are aware of just how much we actually do. And then one of the other things we need to be thoughtful about in terms of environmental leadership is the Silvertip gondola and the upcoming NRCB review as a way to draw a connection to our environmental leadership by make sure the town is actively participating in that project. So that's proposed in 2023 as a funded capital project. And then result number 4 is around safe multimodal transportation and making sure that we're advancing that shift. Oh, there's a delivery from Janet. And the option would be, we have several opportunities from the Bow Valley Regional Transit Commission around the Quarry Lake route, increasing regional transit service and increasing weekday and weekend local service to match the regional service. Those are currently unfunded in the budget, but we will be speaking to what those options would look like as something that council could choose to include. We also have programs to facilitate and encourage mode shift by removing barriers. So things like speed reduction and traffic calming, additional paid parking zones, bike share and incentive programs, more trail signage. All of these things are projects in engineering that council could look to fund. And then completing 50% of our outstanding network gaps for walks and cycle ahead of the 2023 mode shift goals. So we're already on a trajectory for mode shift by 2023. If council wants to see results sooner, we can expedite the process by an increase in funding as a way to escalate the pace of the program. Before 2030. Yeah, that's right. We'll already meet it by 2030, yes. Yeah?
You said 2023. So
oh, sorry, 2030.
Sorry.
2 months. Thank you. I was like, why? Yes, I agree. 2030. That's what it says. Okay. Ooh, I better get my tires soon. Okay. And then advocating for a pedestrian crossing of the Trans-Canada Highway at Palliser that is, for the first time, this has been in the capital budget for a long time, but for the first time, it's actually in the capital plan and funded with anticipated development in the Palliser area. And there is ongoing lobbying we can do with the province to get additional funding support for that program, or for that project. And then we could look at increasing paid parking revenue to assist with offsetting the cost of multi-mode shifts. So we will walk through an option to increase paid parking fees by $1 an hour in the peak season as something for council to consider. So that's it for environment, which gets us to council's third goal of implementing relationships. Respectful, authentic relationships are the foundation of which our future success is built. The first result is around right relations with the Stoney Nakoda Nation, members of the Treaty 7 Nation, and the Métis Region 3 are advanced. So one of the things that's in the capital budget is a small project to formalize our commitment to truth and reconciliation across the organization and expanding relationships with Indigenous communities by hiring a consultant to work with us on creating some of that formalized work. Right now, a lot of that work is off the side of our desk and also done as different Indigenous communities have time. But one of the ways that you create time and willingness with Indigenous communities is by being able to go be in their offices, have meetings with them, and so it really would be about having somebody to help us bridge that gap until we can get relationships a little further advanced. So that is funded in the proposed capital budget. And then strongly encouraging developers to work with Indigenous communities to create Indigenous street names in new subdivisions is something that can be ongoing in the planning department. Considering recognition of our Indigenous neighbors through such things as alternative entrance signs, street names, and space for pub ceremony. Those are all things that we're working on and will be ongoing without any formal budget implications at this time. Considering, oh, sorry, that showed up twice. We feel strongly about it. And then inviting all of our Treaty 7 nations to Canmore events. Council's operating budget has a small increase to elder fees and protocol to be able to ensure that we can continually invite all of our Indigenous neighbors to all of our events and recognize them appropriately when they are able to attend. And on that, Whitney had a phone call yesterday that helped her to think about a new project. So when she does her operating walkthrough, she'll actually have an additional option suggestion for council that didn't make this draft plan, but that we'll put in for the formal one that comes to council for approval in the new year. But just wanted to flag, part of why this is draft is because things are still coming up. And so Whitney will speak more to that tomorrow or Thursday. Under relationships, result 2, intergovernmental business and non-for-profit relationships result in mutually beneficial outcomes. We want to, and council is already working on advocating for policy changes around revenue tools or at least a designation for visitor-based economies in Alberta. And so there has been a small item put into council's budget to allow for that. I do just want to acknowledge that traditional municipal revenue sources and provincial grant funding sources do not account for visitor demand for town services and programs, which means that as a local government, our ability to upgrade existing or create new infrastructure to accommodate visitor demand is limited because it's done largely on the tax base, the residential tax base of local homeowners. And so we have formally put in the council budget a small amount of money to continue with lobbying, having support for lobbying the province in council's operating budget. And again, lack of successful advocacy on this matter continues to disproportionately burden local businesses and residents to the benefit of tours and visitors who are happy to welcome, but it does have an impact. We're also working to increase intermunicipal collaboration throughout the Bow Valley. So Scott will speak to, or you'll be hearing from Caitlin, I guess, that it's not so much in the budget, but coming up, and I can't remember, is it before 2024? Should be before 2024. Caitlin Miller and Silvio Adamo from the town of Banff had been working together on a regional emergency management plan, and they'll be presenting to both councils on the potential of a shared coordinator in future years. We continue to work to improve our relationships with the MD of Bighorn, and we're always looking for opportunities to collaborate with other municipalities. The communication department has been doing some great shared advertising, for example, with the town of Banff, that we'll continue to look at. That doesn't have any budget impact and potentially saves money, because when we're designing and placing one ad with 2 logos, it benefits both communities financially. Oh, and there's that EM coordinator that'll come up as an option. Result 3 is that meaningful 2-way public engagement and communication is civil, substantive, and productive. So we're looking to focus on expanding our public input opportunities, and that's included in the proposed budget, which Therese will speak to. And then we'll look to increase opportunities for public input by establishing a citizen input panel. So council could choose an option to hire a contractor for 2023 and 2024. Otherwise, this would be planned in 2025 with the proposed new position in communication. And more details on that to come. There's also coming is an online community service portal as a way for the public to inquire and report issues. As 2022, council approved a website project, a platform update, and so we're expecting that to be completed in 2023, and that completion will include this portal. So that is a service enhancement that should support council's desired result that is coming in 2023, and it's already part of the approved budget, no additional budget required at this time. Result 4 is that the community understands the value of a strong and healthy public service. And here we want to communicate the work being done by key areas in the organization and using public input to recommend improvements to work that put improvements to work, leading to increased appreciation for the value received for taxes. So this is also something that the communication department is working on as part of their status quo budget by modifying some of our current programs, and Therese will speak more to that. And then while we were looking at relationships, we also took a look at the foundational pillars. So one of your foundational pillars is around financial stewardship, that we protect the long-term assets of residents by managing assets, and the financial resources are managed equitably and sustainably. So one of the things we want to do is review asset depreciation policies through a circular economy lens and link that to asset management. So we have a strong asset management program, and our sustainability team has done some initial work on a circular economy lens. And one of the things that we're working to do is to bring those two programs together to understand if that has any impact on our asset depreciation policies. So that's work that we're doing internally, but that could have an impact on this foundational pillar. So no budget is needed, but it is something we'll be reporting on. It's already covered in the current budget. We'll be reporting on it. And then properly investing in asset rehab and maintenance. So we're coming to a point in the history of Canmore where significant capital investment is needed to maintain, rehabilitate, and replace existing infrastructure. And our current funding capital envelope is insufficient, requires further action to create an affordable capital plan. Otherwise, we risk depleting reserves. So when we speak a bit more around the current status quo budget and how we got there, one of the things that you'll note is that we reduced our contribution to reserves, which is almost always the starting place when the status quo budget is too high, and that does have an impact over time. So really the point there is that we're just flagging that that continues to be something that has an impact that we're going to need to work through. But yeah, I'll leave it at that for now. The other thing we need to do is either follow or update our long-term financial strategy. For years, the budgets have been approved and that we contribute less to reserves than our long-term financial strategy recommends. So the status quo budget does this again. It reduces the contributions to reserves that are recommended in the strategy. And so we recognize that's a broken practice. We either need to update our financial strategy or do something different. We haven't done that for this budget, but as part of the budget process, and I was mentioning at the start, the room that we all sat in for a long time, that was one of the conversations we were having, is it's really going to be, in 2023 and 2024, it's time for us to begin to look at that differently. So there's not necessarily a budget ask of council at this time, but we did want to flag it as something, as work that we'll need to do during this term of council, is to create a new plan or path there. We also want to utilize the service level review to assist in making priority-based decisions with our limited resources. So you may recall, currently administration is working on a service level review. That's a capital project for 2023, or for 2022. And in 2023, we have the next phase, which is once we get the service level review, how do we use it to make priority-based business and budget planning decisions? And that is funded in the 2023 admin capital budget, phase 2 of that service level review.
Dr. Cottle?
Yes.
Could you go back one slide for me, please? One more. Yeah, that one. Can you tell me how big the differential is between the long-term plan of our asset management and what we are actually contributing?
Ms. Rogers can.
We have a gap of $875,000 in our contribution amount each year. And so we will review next week when we do the capital day. We'll review with you the reserve balances, and we can show you how that impacts each of the reserves. But the contribution gap is $875,000 each year.
Okay, we'll get to that later. Thank you.
Yep, capital is next week, and so we'll dive into more detail next week about what that looks like for each of the various reserves.
Excellent, looking forward to it.
The other thing that's linked to financial stewardship, were you going to say something? Okay, is just appropriately managing assets in an increasingly complex world. So when we get to the operating budget details, you'll see that we're suggesting some positions for departments that help us assist with managing the value of our assets and the complex challenges that are faced by the organization and the community. So some of the positions we're looking to bring on help us manage and maintain our assets. And what tends to happen over time is there's a small creep in bringing on more assets, and there becomes a workload tip where one more thing is not a big deal. But if you think about Elevation Place compared to the rec center, when the pool was at the rec center and we had one sheet of ice, both of those facilities are so much more complex than that initial rec center was when it was one sheet of ice and a pool. And so we've added levels of complexity that require higher levels of sophistication and training for our staff to manage. So we're needing a different kind of position in some departments to be able to effectively maintain and manage those assets and resources. And really, we believe that the investment in the staff to do that work is smart financial stewardship. It means we're taking care of the asset, we're maintaining it, and we're avoiding or hoping to avoid significant failure by bringing the right people in to take care of what we have at the right time. And then we want to explore opportunities to align investments with council goals and organizational values through impact investing. This is something that the Banff Canmore Community Foundation is looking at. And so we need to do a little bit more research and investigation. We don't have a budget impact at this time, but it is something that we have in our work plans to look at. And then there's a proposal to revisit the Property Tax Task Force, which is a surprisingly difficult thing to say, including a review of the town's approach to our property tax philosophy and a potential policy update. So that's an unfunded administrative capital project that we'll speak to as an option for council if that's something you think you're interested in doing. And then pillar number 2 is around human resources. People and culture are our strongest assets. We're inclusive and connected. In order to recruit and maintain staff, the proposal is to increase the cost of living or COLA allowance to account for inflation and the high cost of living. Staffing is the town's biggest operating expense, no question. And when we are a lean organization, so when we see a few key gaps in positions, there's an impact on services. And as you all know, Canmore is an expensive place to live. We have a historic practice of giving staff the cost of living increase that is June over June with CPI from Calgary. So that is what is in the proposed budget. The COLA for 2023 is 5.9%. And in our operating budget, that's just over $1 million. I shouldn't say just over, 1,000,007. Rick would say just over. When it was 70,000 is just over for the finance people. And then in 2024, 2.6% is almost 500,000. Certainly, council could look at a smoothing of those two. There's options there, and I know Councillor Graham at a council meeting had asked about averaging COLA. We have looked at that and can speak to it later. This 5.9 is really an anomaly. If you look back over the last decade, COLA has held pretty steady at or below 2% for many, many, many years. It's just been a bit of 2023 is a bit of a fluke. And the predictions for future years show that coming down. So that's how we've budgeted. And then re-examining our 55% pay policy. Right now we have a council policy that says we pay at the 55% median. HR has been doing some work on this, recognizing Canmore's high cost of living and staff turnover, and just the general staff recruiting challenges that everybody is facing right now. A compensation study is underway. It will be completed in 2023, and the impacts will be brought to council in advance of the 2024 budget. Even though council is approving the 2024 budget, if there's any impact on that budget, we can open the budget up and do amendments this time a year from now. So more to come on that, what that might mean. Go ahead, Councillor McCallum.
Dr. Cottle, is performance pay included in this budget?
There is no performance pay proposed in this budget. In part, when we get to the operating impacts, you'll see last year, or earlier this year when we were doing the surplus, council gave administration permission to increase our market adjustments. So in 2022, every position that needed it has had a market adjustment. So everyone is right now, and we also addressed some internal equity issues that we had. So right now, we believe all employees are being paid right where they should be. Yeah.
For that loss that we've had
That's right. And some of that is showing up this year in a little more than a 1% tax increase because of the use of that reserve last year. So we did not include performance in 2023, one, because of the COLA, and two, because of the market adjustment works we've done. Yep. Anything else there? I get it all? Okay. Also under human resources is we want to implement recommendations from the Reconciliation, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Organizational Audit that I mentioned earlier. So there's two things proposed. I mentioned the one around a consultant to help us with our Indigenous neighbors. There's also a capital project in 2023 that also worked to address some of these implementation issues for the organization. And then prioritizing leadership development. So we have lots of different leadership development opportunities, but we don't have a strong, well-developed leadership development program that staff can move through and see a future for themselves in the town of Canmore. It tends to be fairly ad hoc. So you'll see in the proposed operating budgets that we have position increases in HR. Right now, HR continues to really be stymied by the amount of recruiting and retention, or mostly staff recruiting that we're having to do. And so by adding a couple of resources in HR over time, what we'd like to do is smooth out some of that recruitment work to free up the staff we have hired to actually be implementing a training program, to implement it as part of a leadership development program for the organization. And then every year there's a multi-year financial plan from the RCMP. That plan proposes a new position in 2024. It is currently unfunded, but when we get to the operating details, Mr. Mackay will speak to that proposal from the RCMP as an option for council. And then the last pillar is community engagement. We meaningfully engage with citizens for effective decision-making is your key result. And so we want to monitor and measure progress on key indicators. You may recall that the Community Social Development Department came to council with a community monitoring web-based tool earlier this year. That was the initial kickoff of that program. We can do more with that online tool, but of course doing more requires resources. So that is currently unfunded in the CSD operating budget. And again, Mr. Mackay will speak to that as an option. And then many of the things that are identified under result number 3 actually also fit with this pillar. So we didn't double list them, but we believe the relationship result number 3 also helps us forward this specific pillar. So, any questions? Whew, that was a lot of talking. That's our draft plan where we're hoping to go. Again, we'll talk more about each of those things as we work through the operating and capital budgets. And then when we get to council deliberation, you can let us know about any other, any options that you'd like to see included in the budget. If there are no other questions, we're going to do lunch today from 12:30 to 1:30. So I am happy to move on to the second item for today, which is an overview of provincial downloading. If you all want to flip to section 8 of your binders, or for those following online, it'll be the next set of attachments in the agenda. I just have to flip the screen behind me. Thank you, Robin. Yes, I'm ready. Is everybody ready to keep going? Another half an hour? Okay. So provincial downloading overview. This is also, with the last presentation I mentioned, this is new. We haven't really ever done this in this way. And it's like an onion. You know, you immediately think you know what all the things are, and then as you go about the day-to-day work, there was a lot of like, oh, hey, yeah, oh, hey, yeah. So I suspect this is actually not complete and something we could continue to add to over time. We'll keep you posted on that. But this is the state of what we've come up with provincial downloading so far. And just as a reminder, there are 2 council motions that got us to bring this to you as part of this Finance Committee. The first was motion 170, that council track and report back at budget time on the cost for delivering emergency medical services by Canmore Fire Rescue on a cost recovery model. And the second was that we identify potential areas of provincial downloading of costs and report back to council with the estimated total of said downloading. So that's what we're going to just walk through today and what is included in tab 8. So I'll start with the first motion, just generally the approach. There's three documents in your binder. The first two are around medical and water calls, and then the last document is it looks like the capital budget sheet. It unfolds. It's a big spreadsheet. So that's where we categorized everything by division and department. We identified the program and tried to articulate the impact on the town. We tried to identify the year that the change or the provincial downloading started. And then we gave the estimated financial impacts for 2021 and 2022. And then the very last is just additional comments or other explanation that we tried to provide to help make sense of it all. So I'm going to walk you through all of those with this presentation. I'll start with the first motion and emergency medical calls. So it's the first 2 pages, our EMS and water rescue calls. So in terms of emergency medical services, in 2021, we spent about $85,000 in staff time and vehicle resources responding to medical calls. It cost the town about $20,000 a year to remain ALS capable. As a reminder, our fire staff tend to be certified in one of 2 things, either BLS, which is basic life support, or ALS, which is advanced life support. And that basically is an ability to administer a different set of drugs. So when you show up on scene and there's somebody who's in medical distress, when you are ALS capable, you have the ability to provide a different level of life-saving drug. So we have to train staff to keep those qualifications. We have those qualifications on some staff from back when we were an integrated service. And every year the town has invested in maintaining those certifications for those staff and keeping the additional drugs on the truck and up to date. So our estimation in 2021 is about $106,000 for the municipality to provide emergency medical services. And then in 2022, year to date, the medical calls have been about 76,000. We're projecting, based on actuals and trends, that the actual year end will be around 101,000, plus adding in the ALS capable costs, about 121,000 to provide emergency medical services. And basically that means we're first on scene when an ambulance is called. And then, even though it wasn't exactly what you asked for, it's kind of a cross between provincial downloading and emergency response is water rescue calls. So the river technically fits under Kananaskis Public Service, KPS. But oftentimes when people are on the river and they need help and they can see the 3 sisters, when they call 911, they say, I'm in Canmore. And so the dispatch call often comes to our fire department. And we're working with KPS on this response and making sure that the right call goes to the right place. But Kananaskis is a big region. Oftentimes those first responders are not right within town and as readily available as our fire department. So years ago, we got in the business of owning a boat and training our staff to be able to respond to a river. So we do have agreements in place, or we have operational agreements with Kananaskis Public Safety around when we respond to the river. And in 2021, we spent about $4,000 in equipment and $8,000 in labor for a total of $12,000 responding for water rescue. And in 2022 year to date, it's about $7,000. Generally, you get fewer and fewer river calls once you get into winter and cold weather. They do happen, but most of those are obviously summer boat type of rescues. So that's an additional first response call. It's not quite EMS, but it is a provincial responsibility. So we just wanted to flag it. And then,
Dr. Cottle?
yeah, go ahead.
I'm assuming the boat was a significant investment as well. And would there be any other reason for us to own that other than?
No, we own the boat because of the river calls. There was a time, and this predates me a bit, but if anybody else in the room knows more about it and wants to jump in, let me know. There was a time when we didn't have a boat, and what would happen is the call would still come in to Canmore Fire, and they would get dispatched to the river, and they'd be standing on the side of the river, able to see people in the river who need help. And sometimes passerbys would be yelling at them to be help. Why aren't you helping them? People need help. So we ended up with a boat through that kind of process because we were being called, and there is an ethic of duty when you are called and capable to respond. So the exact history of how we ended up with the boat, I'm not sure, but it is part of our staffing and training to maintain that boat and to maintain staff certifications to be able to provide that level of rescue. Yeah, it's been quite some time.
And would we include the cost of that boat in this?
Yeah, so whenever we bill, there is depreciating costs for equipment and labor. So that equipment cost, that's not the full cost of the boat, but anytime the boat goes out, there's an estimation of the cost of the apparatus. It's the same with fire. When a fire truck goes out, there's a cost to the apparatus. So it's not you don't charge the full replacement cost of the boat every time, but there's assumptions made about the apparatus.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question.
Sure.
Do we bill public safety for these responses and get paid back, or are we just, is this us just calculating what it is we spend per response?
It's the same as EMS. It's another provincial body who does not pay us back. And we don't bill at this time. We don't bill EMS either because there's no agreement in place that we see us paid.
We do bill Alberta Transportation for highway response, so.
Correct, because there is an agreement in place for that. Okay, and that gets to the other document, the bigger spreadsheet. This is all the other downloading, that second motion that's not related to emergency medical response. So first we'll start under municipal services with protective services. So the first item there is traffic fine revenue. In 2022, the province reduced the amount of money that comes from fines given within town the amount we were able to get was 50% a year. This is, I believe, through photo radar. So the amount that we collect is about 50,000 less a year. The province keeps a bigger portion of all photo radar tickets. So our overall revenue has reduced. Also in traffic reporting, in 2022, the province changed the requirements around traffic reporting. I don't fully understand it, so you jump in, Mr. Mackay, if I get any of this wrong. But when an officer, so instead of a peace officer, but a bylaw officer, issues a ticket, our CPOs actually have to go online and do the reporting and validate. And so there's about 5,000 in staff time because of a process change by the province where our peace officers now have to sit at a computer and do work. And so the estimated cost of that process change is about $5,000 annually in staff time. The province, several years ago, there was an incident with someone named Rod Lazenby who died in the line of work as a bylaw officer. And as a result of an inquiry by the Solicitor General, there was a requirement that all people who perform certain duties under municipal enforcement be certified as certified peace officer level 1. It's now a provincial requirement. So all of our municipal enforcement staff, formerly known as bylaw officers, so not paid parking folks, but the folks who live and work, not live, but work out of the bylaw or municipal enforcement, have to be certified as CPO 1. And you'll notice on the spreadsheet, I spelled it peach instead of peace. But it's a peace officer, not a peach officer. They have to be certified as CPO level 1. It's quite intensive training, but one of the real challenges is that the province doesn't regularly offer the training. And so when we go to hire somebody who doesn't have all the certification, there is a long wait time where they are employed but not actually able to write tickets. And then when they do go to the training, I believe it's 6 weeks, there's a lot of time out of the office. And so what's happening is a bunch of municipalities are trying to provide the training themselves, but there's not a routine, if you have turnover in the department, you can have somebody who's working, but you're not able to get revenue or have them actually do the work for some time. So we estimated this year in 2022, as that department, the Municipal Enforcement Department, was fully staffed. We got all the staff trained. But the estimated cost was about $25,000, and the annual cost will depend on staff turnover. It costs between $5,000 to $10,000 to hire someone and have them become fully certified, but then there's also lost revenue in that. So it just depends every year what the cost is, depends on staff turnover. Starting in 2021, the province randomly started billing municipalities for RCMP biological casework. So depending on how much work your RCMP or local RCMP detachment sends to the lab, you get a bill from the province where you have to pay a portion of those costs. It started randomly in 2021. We refused to pay at the town of Canmore and tried to get Alberta municipalities to lobby on our behalf. And what came back from the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General at the time was, too bad, pay it. So we have paid it for 2022. In 2021, it was about $5,000. In 2022, it was about $3,000. And it just depends every year on how much biological casework your local detachment does. We're still waiting to hear on the RCMP unionization in 2027. From 2027 on, there's, as you know, Alberta municipalities has done a lot of lobbying of the provincial government to try to say municipalities shouldn't have to pay for that. We still don't know what that will be. We are paying for the new fees going forward, but that retroactive pay has yet to be determined, so we don't know if there will be a cost. And as you know, with the change in the Alberta government leadership, there is conversation about a provincial police force. I'm surprised, honestly, that there hasn't been a recommendation made so far. But if there is, we expect there will be costs to the municipality. We just don't yet know what those are. Feral rabbit management. The province does not deem feral rabbits to be a wildlife, so the province does not do any work on feral rabbit management or removal. The municipality has been doing this work every year since 2011 for about $50,000 a year. And then starting in 2021, there's been some changes to how the province addresses wildlife issues. So they no longer will deal with elk at certain times of year. So if an elk passes away in your backyard, for example, it's our Streets and Roads Department that comes and moves it. And so far, we're estimating that's costing us about $15,000 a year. That's a fairly recent change. In community social development, there's several changes. As you know, there's proposed changes to victim services, and the local victim services organization is coming to your November COW meeting to give you an update. It's unknown what those costs will be. One of the proposals with the change to victim services is that the staff become municipal employees. I suspect if that happens, it will be similar to the grants we currently have for FCSS and FRN, where there's no indexing. And so we could bring somebody in-house, but continue to see the municipality having to pay a portion of those costs. It's unknown at this time. We anticipate staff spend about $15,000 a year in time and small programs and services responding to local homelessness because there are no or very limited homeless supports aside from an RDN grant in the Bow Valley. We're seeing more and more fiscal arrangement asks for the town to be a fiscal agent. So somebody gets a grant, and one of the requirements is that there has to be a certain type of organization that receives the money. And there's a lot of non-for-profits in town who aren't set up to be appropriate fiscal agents, and they ask the town to do it. And initially, it's one of those things, like earlier when I was talking about the complexity of assets, it seems like a really nice, fairly easy, no-brainer, small thing to do, but Rick is laughing because it ends up being a lot of work, mostly in our finance department. They don't often have the same year end. There's all kinds of, there ends up being workload. And again, when it's one fiscal agent ask with a simple request, it's one thing, but as the problems become more and more complex and the organizations responding become more and more complex, the asks for the town become more and more complex. So we've mostly started to say no to these asks. Because we haven't been able to quantify them. So it's something we're still working on, understanding how we're going to respond to this emergent issue and quantify the asks. But what it often means is that a local group who's trying to be proactive and get a grant to address a community problem sometimes can't do it if they don't have the appropriate organization to be a fiscal agent. So it can become a form of downloading to the municipality because either we have to become the fiscal agent or the expectation is that we step in and address the issue. As you know, the Parent Link program was canceled in 2020 and replaced with the FRN. FRN receives $125,000 less a year than Parent Link did. Parent Link covered children ages 0 to 6. FRN covers children 0 to 18. So it's less money and a bigger client group. The town is paying $60,000 in 2022. The chart that's in your binder is a little bit off. In 2023, that will increase to somewhere between 110 and 122K for FRN. The council of the day, when we put the FRN in place, agreed to one position that wasn't funded. So there is one municipally funded position in FRN, and then because, and I'll get to this in a second, there's no increase in the funding. Those staff historically in Parent Link weren't receiving cost of living or performance increases, and their salary was staying the same. And when we brought the FRN in, the council of the day agreed to put those staff on the salary grid. So there is an additional top-up that the municipality is now providing to ensure that those employee salaries move with cost of living. Then also with childcare, there's been changes to the subsidy. There was a $25 a day program that was canceled. Then a subsidy was brought back in, but now it has restrictions on it where it can only be full-time. And so there's a number of different parent needs in the community that aren't met currently through the childcare subsidy. So we anticipate staff spend about $25,000 a year in their time helping deal with a childcare crisis of one time or another, whether that's a lack of enough childcare spaces, a lack of affordable childcare spaces, or some combination of those two things. FCS is also looking at, there's a social service regionalization happening. It's been going on since 2020. We estimate that costs about $15,000 a year. So the approach to programs and services is less local and more regional, which means that we can give less community-specific work, and we're spending more time helping people navigate a regional system. And so that's, again, an estimation in staff time. As I mentioned, there's no indexing in FCSS or FRN. So FCSS has not seen a funding increase since 2015, I believe. And the FRN has had static funding since it started in 2020. So in both of those, there's also no coverage for corporate supports. HR, IT, finance work that we do with those departments are all paid for through the municipality. And then I mentioned the $60,000 to $122,000 in FRN for salary supports. In FCSS in 2022, it's $175,000 to keep those staff on the salary grid and to get them a cost of living increase because their funding doesn't change. So again, we increase their salaries every year with COLA, and that's the municipality paying for that. That's above our 80-20 split. And then corporate services and HR and finance. In 2019, the STEP program, Summer Temporary Employment Program, ended. We used to get about $10,000 a year of hiring summer employees. There were some criteria that it had to be new employees. We were always able to find a way to get a STEP grant. That ended in 2019. Grants in place of taxes are for the provincial government giving us a subsidy for the amount of their taxes for lands owned within the town of Canmore. In 2019, they started to reduce that amount by, I think it was 24%, and they changed it again in 2020 or 2021. And so it's about $44,000 a year that we would normally have gotten for a grant in place of taxes that we no longer receive. Yep, go ahead.
Is this cover our seniors and social housing lands as well, those?
I don't know. I think it's buildings like the courthouse,
Because then that was before, because they've stopped paying the grants in lieu of taxes on
Seniors
BVRH
housing.
buildings in Canmore for a long time.
Yeah. So this would be like the, why can't I think, the visitor information center out on the highway, the courthouse, those provincial buildings in town. They used to pay the equivalent of local taxes, and they don't. They pay a smaller portion now. Yeah, it's reducing.
Okay.
As you know, MSI is being reduced, Municipal Sustainability Initiative. has been reduced so that in 2022, we are receiving 2.2 million. This is down from 4.8 million, and then it went down to 2.6 million, and now it'll be down to 2.2. Further, the MSI programming is transitioning to LGFF funding. We anticipate, based on the draft models we've seen, what the final LSI model will look like has not been determined. But based on what Alberta Municipalities was proposing, we anticipate a reduction in 12 to 15% coming to Canmore. And so we have, when we get to capital, you'll see we've made an assumption about this reduction so that we have further provincial funding to use for funding the capital budget. We've made a conservative estimate based on what we think is coming with LGFF. And then in 2016, the province removed a cap on education tax. They used to limit the amount of education tax that could come out of any community, and they removed that in 2016. And the impact this has on Canmore is that for most residents, more than half of the local the tax bill that you get is for education tax. And so there are some arguments to be made that that is tax room that the municipality could take, but the province moves into it with education tax. And we know in Canmore, we send way more to the province in education tax than actually comes back into schools in our community. So education tax is can be a significant burden. And then I don't know if council would believe this counts as downloading, but we wanted to add it. In 2000, Canmore started the community housing organization, and we're in 2021 and 2022, we're funneling $450,000 through taxes for that program. Incredibly valuable, great program, again, but it could be considered a form of provincial downloading because there is no provincial affordable housing program that meets that particular need. Questions? That's it. That's our list so far, everything we've come up with to date. We didn't total it. You could make a running total. I mean, there are some things in that list that you might think of in different ways. Again, like the affordable housing is as an example. Some things are staff time estimates versus other things like grants in place of taxes or MSI that are reductions in actual money into our revenues. So it's challenging to come up with a total. But that's our running list.
Thank you.
Comments, questions?
I want to thank you. I believe this came out of a motion that I had put forward around EMS services. And this must take in a lot of time and work, but it really helps me understand better all the little areas where increased costs are cumulatively adding up in terms of what the province is making decisions on that affect us. And I think being able to frame it this way with almost a totality helps in terms of being able to communicate with the community about the budget pressures we face as council. Thank you.
Yeah, we're appreciative of the motion because I think also we all knew it was happening in some very specific ways, but it was really helpful actually to turn our minds to it and to see ways that we sort of have taken for granted or don't notice anymore. So we appreciate the motion and think it was worth doing. Absolutely. Yeah, it is.
Just a rough calculation, recognizing some of them don't even have numbers to them yet. I see it as approximately $1 million in operational funding and $2.2 million in capital funding. That's $3.2 million. That's over 10% of that's about a 10% of our budget.
Yeah.
That we tax for.
That we tax for to make up for it. Councillor Graham, did you have something?
Yeah, I guess the question I have now is, what can we do with that number?
Well, yesterday
Right.
I sent all of council a link to the budget survey. The province has a really big surplus, and they're looking for public input on what to do with it. So I encourage you all to take that survey and encourage residents to take it as well. But then the rest of it is, there's additional and ongoing lobbying for the province, which we're trying to do. We have Administration has done a good bit of engagement with Alberta municipalities around their proposed LGFF model. And the CAOs from the town of Jasper and Banff and I had several meetings at Alberta municipalities with administrators about our concerns about the LGFF proposed model in particular. But aside from advocacy and giving the province suggestions on what to do with their surplus, then the question really for council becomes either you're going to tax for it or you're going to reduce programs and services in the community. Unless somebody has sees some other way.
Well, I mean, the information itself is just useful to help understand how we get here, right? And we, every year after year, get some sort of download, which then we have to tax for. And the question is, how come the tax increases are so high? Well, a portion of it is that we are continually being asked to pay more for something that the province should be paying for. And that's part of the answer. So, yeah, I think it's great information. What will come of it? Well, that is to be determined, but I'm really grateful that we have the information, and it's organic. The list will probably continue to grow, and numbers will become more certain. The thing is that we now have that start and that understanding, so that we can, talk to that narrative, whether it be advocacy or with our own residents.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking, I was thinking as you were talking, Mayor Krauser, we for a long, and I don't intend any judgment in using this as an example, but when we had the Parent Link and FCSS, we made really conscious decisions. So even though Parent Link funding was never increasing, the agreement with the province is that program was 100% grant funded. And so the municipality didn't put any money aside from space and although we did, because finance worked with them and HR worked with them, but we didn't actually change their budget. But that meant for years, staff got no increase to their salary. And then we saw staff starting to have to work second and third jobs to be able to remain in the community. Right, and then it becomes a moral question about what are we doing when we employ staff and hire them in that program and we know it's not sustainable, right? So, yeah, it's helpful information, and then also becomes, I think, a fundamental question about what kind of community do you want to build. If you think back to a year ago when we were having budget discussions, Lisa DeSoto did I thought a really great presentation on building a community and investing in a community. And some of that is infrastructure in a building like Elevation Place, but some of it is also investing in the people who deliver really critical programs to the community that you're trying to foster. So anyway, do you still have a hand up, Councillor Graham or Councillor Faubert? Everybody, even the council chamber has its hand up now. Everyone's raising their hand. So if you have something to say, jump right in.
I have a follow-up, but Sandy, if you've got something, go ahead.
I was just going to say that when I look at the budget summary for next year and the proposed municipal tax increase that we're looking at, being able to contextualize that around how much of that number is not our choice and comes as a result of decisions being made by the provincial government, that's just it's a conversation to have with people who want to talk about our proposed tax increase this year. So to me, that's what I would use it for, increased understanding in terms of the community.
Councillor Graham?
What would have happened to FCSS should we not have made those COLA adjustments? Like, would we just lost staff? Would the program have shut down?
Yeah, likely. So FCSS has been on the salary grid for some time, but it's the FRN or the former Parent Link that changed when we had that grant change. And yes, I do think we would have seen, like if you look at FCSS, we have several staff who have been with the municipality for quite a long time and provide a continuity of service. So I believe we would have just seen a significant turnover, and at some point it would mean that you can't hire people anymore because it's no longer a living wage.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
Question for Therese and Rick, just to kind of get my mind wrapped around this. For every 1% in tax increase, what's the revenue amount that we're generating out of our current population size?
$281,000 represents a 1% tax increase.
Yeah, so
this
1%,
year.
281, and we have a
Yeah.
download of 3.2 million.
Yeah.
Thank you. Put that in your nose, Greg.
Any other comments or questions?
I'm sorry, can you say that?
We're scheduled to take a lunch break from, that was some good timing. We're scheduled to take a lunch break till 1:30. Mayor Krausert may be a bit late coming back because he's got a call. But at 1:30, we'll turn it over to Therese and Pelkey, who will walk us through the starting point for the operating budget, just a high-level overview and what some of the top influencers are on where we're starting. That'll be it for today, and then on Thursday, we'll get into walking through the actual department-by-department narrative and department changes and more detail on the options I shared this morning. So if there's no questions, do we have to make a motion to go to lunch? I think we do, right? Or do we just go? We just
We'll just
leave?
take a recess.
We're just taking a break. I don't even, you do it every time, and I don't even know what you do. Obviously, I'm not paying enough attention. Okay, we're gonna take a recess till 1:30. See you then. Great, thank you. We're back live for the second portion of today's Finance Committee meeting, which is called to order officially. So next up, Therese is gonna, and with Pelkey in the background and Rick are gonna walk us through the high-level operating and capital overview. So same as this morning, if you have questions, once we put the presentation up, for those of you who are online, it's really hard to see you, so just jump in at any time. Therese, you let us know if you want questions at the end or how you want to work it. But
I will feel free to ask questions as you have them. If I'm going to get to something later, I'll just ask you to hold it. And if you want to follow along, section 3 in your binder has the summary. And then I handed out the presentation as well. So I don't know if that will be helpful for you or not. So as Sally said, I'm going to walk through a high-level overview. How do I make it go on the screen?
Robin does that.
Okay.
You just tell her, you ask her nicely.
There it is. Robin, please, could you put it on the screen? Thank you. All right. This budget ensures that funding is in place to continue to deliver existing town services and programs. The 2023-24 budget cycle really clearly sheds light on the financial challenges that are being faced by the town, but also by the community and the country. And you heard some of that this morning. It was both interesting and disheartening that many factors within the broad environment have a significant impact on the town's expenses, and there's very little that we can do about much of it. Residents and businesses still need and expect municipal services, and we've seen requests for more services, more infrastructure, more amenities. And we're trying to balance that with the expenses that we're seeing. So at a very high level, there are a number of factors that impact us across the board in 2023 and 2024. We've seen record inflation, which has had a significant impact on operating costs. As Sally mentioned this morning, we have incorporated in this preliminary budget a COLA for staff increases of 5.9% in 2023 and 2.6% in 2024. And then there are inflationary factors considered throughout the rest of the budget, and we'll talk more about those as I walk you through this. Again, as a reminder, we're seeing decreasing funding from all levels of government. I think the mayor added that up to be about $1 million impact just in that provincial downloading sheet that we shared with you. Rising interest rates are leading to higher borrowing costs. And there are still some ongoing COVID impacts, broken supply chain issues which are impacting costs of construction and costs of our projects, and the timing of when we get things. We're still having trouble, for example, getting laptops in a timely manner to replace old equipment. And we are experiencing labor market issues with turnover and having difficulty recruiting and retaining staff. So since July, when we received budget direction from council, administration has been working on preparing this budget. And we also have been trying to prepare you for the size of the tax increase that we're bringing in this preliminary budget. So I thought I just would start with that and then we can move on. I'm just not sure how else to say it, you know? So in 2023, this preliminary budget does have a proposed tax increase of 12.5%. In 2024, that drops to 5.6, 5.7 in 2025, and 3.1 in 2027. When we analyze our mill rates and our municipal taxes compared to other Alberta communities, we are actually at either the midpoint or on the lower end. And that's information that we do bring you each year when we set the mill rate, is to do that analysis. But that doesn't make it easier for someone to pay their property taxes. I totally understand that. I don't want to diminish that. What I'll do is walk you through how we got there. First thing I wanted to draw your attention to or remind you of was the impact of COVID tax reductions that we made. In 2020, due to COVID, we held taxes to the same level as 2019. So we had a 0% tax increase in that year. And while it's almost impossible to calculate the exact dollar impact of that, 1.3 million was taken out of the budget. And that's funding which would have gone a long way to delivering programs, services, or contributing to our capital needs. And that gap is shown on the chart here. So the higher bolder line is where we would have been. And so we're on the same kind of trajectory for tax increase, but at a lower amount. And so that gap of 1.3 million is with us and takes quite some time to catch up. In 2010-ish, we had a similar decrease in our tax base, and it took us about 10 years to catch up from that. So we're still feeling the impact here of this COVID. Okay. In other terms, I guess the 1.3 million, you could say, would fund some of the positions that we need in years, or it could add services, or it could help offset some of the expenses that we now have because of provincial downloading. So, in a really rough estimate, you might say this would have made a difference for us of about 0.5% or 1% of taxes. It's not quite as simple as saying 1.3 divided by the 281,000, but what we really wanted to illustrate here is that the impact is significant and it's still with us, and we're feeling that. Over the course of September and October, the leadership team reviewed and really finalized this preliminary budget that we're bringing forward for you today. This is a status quo budget. You've heard us talk about that terminology, status quo, and really what that means is it includes the cost to maintain existing programs and services at existing levels. It includes those service adjustments previously accepted by Council in budget plans. So you'll recall last year you approved a budget for 2022 and we had a plan for 2023. And in order to address growth and increased volumes that we're seeing, the status quo budget does include some new positions, and I'll go through those in detail a little bit later. So the first draft of the budget that we prepared started at 20%. And with the help of departments, adjustments and reductions were made to get us to this 12.5. And I think the 20% is not a surprise when, again, we hear the $1 million of provincial downloading. That in and of itself is a 10% tax increase. So we've worked hard to get this number down, and I'll go through each of the items that we have already removed. We wanted you to be aware of what those are and show you how we got to where we are. As Sally mentioned this morning, we started right off the top by reducing transfers to reserves, and this has happened every year, I think, since I've been at the town. The long-term financial strategy has us, in theory, increasing our contribution to reserves every year, and we haven't ever really been able to do that. And so right off the top, we took $875,000 out of that contribution. The $875,000 is a gap that's been created over years of not increasing our contributions to the amount that they should be. Again, in simple math. So, we're going to take you through the capital budget in more detail. Palki will review all of our funding for you, and we'll have a bit more discussion at that time about reserves and reserve balances, but wanted to illustrate for you here that this has come out already. Joanna, you asked this morning about performance increases. We had in the preliminary budget $200,000 for pay grade adjustments or performance increases. And as Sally explained, we did take that out as well. We feel that we need next year to finalize our pay grade adjustments and our philosophy to pay. And then we've got that amount back in, $300,000 actually in 2024. So that amount has come out. Mm-hmm. We also had in the preliminary, or that sort of first draft of the budget, recruitment consultant support of $100,000, and we have taken that out as well. We're not anticipating CAO recruitment this year. You can't go anywhere, Sally. And the addition of the HR administrative support position, which I'll talk about a little bit later, will create some capacity for us, and so we feel relatively safe in taking that out, but we also need to see what happens. Really, turnover is one of the things that's very difficult to predict, both in quantity, but also in which positions. And so some of our more technical specialist type of positions can be harder for us to recruit for and are often where we see greater success using a recruitment consultant. And so there may be a need to still go down that road. And we would manage that then within the human resources budget, or if we have a variance, we'll speak to that and flag that for council so that you know what's coming. Next item is slippage. And so slippage, we've increased by $120,000. And I mentioned this briefly when we had our orientation to budget last week. Was that last week? October 25th, whenever that was. And slippage really is the payroll savings that we see due to staff turnover or vacant positions. So we budget all of our positions as if they're occupied and full for the whole year. Sometimes they're not, and that difference that we're not spending is what we call payroll slippage. And so as I had mentioned last week, we've taken an approach this year of averaging. Historically, we've done kind of our best guess. We've looked back at what we actually had, and we said this year, let's average the last 7 years. We did exclude 2020 and 2021. The impact of COVID is just too great to say that there's anything predictable about what's happened in those years. But when we look at that average from 2013 to 2019, it was 3.5% of total payroll. And so that's what we've applied in this budget, which resulted in that increase of $120,000 to the good, right? That helps us. Okay, then back to the adjustment sheet. On the snow and ice control budget, we took a similar approach to slippage. Looking at what our actual spend has been since we had the snow and ice control policy in place and taking that averaging kind of an approach. Weather is probably more impossible to predict even than staff turnover. And so there's a chance again that the weather could result in us needing to spend more on snow removal. Could also be a warm or light snow winter and we could need to spend less. So we felt that averaging approach is really a prudent way to budget and then react and respond based on what's actually happening in the weather rather than budgeting for the worst case scenario and taxing for the worst case scenario. And again, we would keep you up to date on what's happening there, but that resulted in a savings of $100,000. We did include in this budget, and this is not new, but I just wanted to draw your attention to it because it is a significant amount, and that is a draw from the tax stabilization reserve of $600,000. That is what we did last year, and that was part of our plan to help phase in the impact of increased staffing in fire, the impacts of the RCMP contract, and also a bit of the debt from the fire hall. So we have that same draw in 23 and 24. Just had a question myself here. Sorry. And then finally, the library reduced their initial ask by $48,000. There's a few other items clearly, but these were the most significant, and you can see that really was a difference there of about 7.3%, which brought us down from that initial 20% that our preliminary work had us at. I'll just pause there in case there's any questions about any of that. Okay. Municipalities need to work within balanced budgets. We're not actually legislatively able to run a deficit. And so what we have to first figure out is what are all of the expenses that we have, and then how are we going to pay for those things? Okay. So on the expense side of things, and this is hard to read, it is in your presentation that I handed out for you, and we'll review this in much more detail on Thursday as we go through the divisional updates. But just at a very high level, a total of $68 million is required for this status quo preliminary budget, and that's to run town operations. That does include the utility. From the, other than this very high level overview, we won't include the utility. We'll talk about that separately on our capital day because it is a unique and different, completely different approach to how we fund. But at this overall level, we did want to include that for you. So 67% of our budget relates to staffing and contracted service, which makes it really difficult without cutting back on staff or on services to make significant impacts to that budget. And that's that top kind of line there that you see. Okay. Now, to fund that budget, there are a few different options. but less than you might have in private industry. So we have very few revenue sources actually available to us. Franchise fees is one source of revenue and one piece of our revenue puzzle. And it really is, those fees are designed to ensure that anyone who benefits from the services of utility companies contribute to the cost of that utility. We'll spend some time on Thursday walking you through a proposal that we have for increasing franchise fees in 2024 and let you know what we anticipate that might look like and how that can help impact what we're looking for from a tax perspective. What's, I think, important to point out with the franchise fees, which I thank Pelkey for, because I'm not sure it was always this crystal clear for me in the past, but franchise fees are actually one way of collecting revenue from those who do not pay municipal taxes. And so there are certain properties or certain property owners who are exempt from municipal taxes. They still pay utility fees. So there is, it's a way of more equitably distributing the cost of running municipal services. Other taxpayers also do pay those, but it's one way that we can ensure that we're getting at least some revenue from those who don't pay municipal taxes for a variety of reasons. Sales and user charges are another area that we collect revenue on. That might be paying for a specific service, like we've listed here, ice rental or aquatics. Could be a cemetery plot. Could also be fees for service, like a development fee, for example. And then we make up the difference of what's left over through municipal taxes. So once we've subtracted any other sources of revenue that we have, the balance has to be made up of municipal taxes again so that we achieve that balanced budget. Okay. So you'll see on this revenue chart, we've listed there sales and rentals, permits and fines, some grants, and then of course tax being a big portion of where and how we fund our services. Okay. And then as a reminder, that 1% tax increase in 2023 equals $281,000. So just helps put some context in. Yes?
Just on that, so that's 281 based on 2022, isn't it 320 based on 2023?
24, yeah.
Okay, so we look at the previous years?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Included in your package is 2024, really the same kind of story. We see a bit of that increase that we shared with you. I'm not going to go through them really in detail. Again, we'll spend more time on those budgets by division and by department, which is, I think, where some of it has better, fits better. Okay. So I will go into a bit more detail now in reviewing with you the biggest changes that we've seen in the budget, and really at a high level, those changes that impact the whole organization, or some that are significant because of their value. And just again, as a reminder, the new initiatives to implement Council's strategic plan that are not included in this preliminary status quo budget were reviewed this morning as options for you. There are some things that are part of the work that we're already doing that are part of that status quo that still support your initiatives, and those have been included within this status quo budget. And Sally went through that this morning, and it's highlighted on that summary that you got today. So you can just see that distinction, what's in and what's out, can sometimes be difficult or confusing to see. Okay. The status quo also includes increased volumes and growth that we've seen within the organization. So I'll start with revenue sources. Again, we fund expenses from a variety of revenue sources, with taxes making up the difference or the balance. We are anticipating $400,000 in growth in 23 and 24, which helps us. Okay. On the paid parking side, the paid parking program is budgeted to bring in $1.2 million in revenues, which is an increase of $405,000. This amount is entirely offset through the costs to administer the program, a portion of that being transit services, and then increased transfers to the paid parking reserve. And Scott and Whitney will walk you through that model and what we're expecting in 23 and 24 on Thursday. We have a section of the agenda that's specifically about revenues. Okay. We are anticipating an increase in recreation revenues. Recreation sales are being projected at $3.9 million, and it's based on current trends, showing an increase of about $175,000. And this increase in revenue is really coming from services slowly returning to normal after the uncertainty and impacts of COVID. Franchise fees, even if there's no increase in our franchise fee rate, we are anticipating seeing an increase in our actual franchise fees because of consumption. So we receive estimates from both ATCO Gas and Fortis Alberta, and they estimate what volumes they're seeing in usage of energy, and then they let us know how much we can expect our share of that to increase. So we are expecting increased franchise fees just from consumption, not, and that's before we would have any other increase.
Therese, can I just hop in?
Yes, please.
Robin just reminded that everything Therese is saying is also in the narrative that's in section 3.
Yep.
So but just as you're following along, or if you want to go, you're taking notes now and want to find it later, everything is in that narrative document.
Thank you. Okay, so the proposed increase that we want to review with you on Thursday for franchise fees has not been included in that base budget for 2024 because it's a proposal and that is the status quo, so I just wanted to clarify. But we will walk through that again in more detail on Thursday. Okay. On the permit side, we are expecting to see an increase in permit revenue, largely based on higher volumes of development permits. And just as a reminder, we did have council approve earlier this year a development reserve. So any surpluses that we see on the development side are going into that reserve, and then we're using those to fund the work it takes to actually process development permits. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Okay. So that is changes to revenue sources at a high level. Any questions? Nope. Okay. Moving on to expenses again, most of which, or at least many of which, are beyond our control. We'll start by walking through third-party expenses. So we are seeing insurance rate increases, and I think that's pretty common across the board, both for individuals but for businesses across the province. Included in our insurance increase this year is some focus on cybersecurity, which is a huge risk for us. As you'll remember, the town of Banff had a very difficult cyber incident earlier in the year, and so really prudent for us to have some insurance to help us in the event that that might happen here. Okay. Bank and service fees are increasing. Not much to say about that. Professional fees for services that we purchase have also experienced price increases. And again, businesses that we deal with when we're the customer also have increases based on inflation, staffing, and what have you. So included within this amount are increases that we have on our assessment contract. We had a contract renewal both for the assessor and for our auditor, and we saw some increases in those contracts, just reflecting what's happening from an inflationary perspective. Okay. The other item that we're seeing on the professional fees side is the switch in our information technology approach, and really where the industry is going, which is from buying software and owning and hosting software to having information on the cloud and paying a subscription type of service. And Microsoft, for example, is moving in that direction with their SharePoint product that we use as Town Square. That will no longer be available as a purchased Town Square or SharePoint product. It will only be available as SharePoint Online in the next couple of years. So we're seeing that happen in more and more of our lines of business, and that shift has resulted in an increase to our software expenses. You've heard about the RCMP increase. There's a couple of things that impact our contract increase in RCMP. One is the new pay structure for officers with their new rates of pay, and that again is all moving forward. We don't yet know what's going to happen from a retroactive perspective. But the other piece of that is that with our population bump over 15,000, our share of that contract has increased to 90%, with 10% paid for by the province. The timing on that one, you'll see the number is a bit different in 23 than it is in 24, because the RCMP's fiscal year starts on April 1st, not on January 1st like ours does. So in the first year, it's about 9 months of that, and then in the second year, when that kicks in, it would be the full 12 months. I'm not sure if we have full certainty on when that's going to actually kick in, but we're planning for this. That's all the information that we have at this point. Okay. We've seen increases for Rome. There's two things going on there. One is increased cost to maintain current service levels, and you'll remember Martin walking through that in his presentation. Again, the same things that are facing us, costs for fuel, costs for employees, everything is costing more, and that affects us the same as it does anyone else in the community. Okay. Increased parts, increased labor, all of those status quo services are costing more. That sun is so bright, hey? Off your window, Scott. No, it's okay. Do you think? Okay, thank you.
No, I'm fine, actually. I'll do it.
Let's all do it. Okay, I'll carry on. Contracted services have increased in parks, fleet, and streets and roads to maintain both new and existing areas. So we have to assume assets at a certain point in development, and we're seeing the cost of having to manage those assets. Okay. In corporate services, we're seeing increases in communication. It's the year that we would do our customer perspective survey, so we're on a cycle where every other year we conduct that survey with Ipsos Reid. 2023 is the year that we would, again, conduct that survey. So you'll see that as an increase in the budget. We also have some contract service dollars in municipal clerk's office for some FOIP support, both to respond to the increasing number of FOIP requests that we're getting, but also to provide some training, which we don't have the capacity to do internally. So. And then, like the rest of the nation, business and individuals, rising energy costs are impacting us across the board. So.
How much is 9% increase?
In energy?
Yes, just in a dollar amount.
One moment. Our phone a friend will pull that up. Whitney. Whitney. Yeah.
A little over $200,000.
So 9% is $200,000?
I'm just looking at the
Yeah.
raw numbers, sorry, of the increases of powers, 128, natural gas, 146, so 250,000.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
That's including utilities, including wastewater treatment plants.
Great.
Again, almost a 1% tax increase in energy costs.
And streetlights.
Yeah. It's reflecting off of Scott's office. You closed that one? Oh, is that your office? Sorry, every time I'm looking out at the screen and then I get the sun in my eye reflecting on the window up there. Sorry.
It's funny because we love the sun in here.
Totally. Yeah, it's hard for that. Perfect. Already better. Thank you, Whitney. That's great. Right. All right. On the people side of the budget, town staff struggle with the same livability and affordability concerns as the rest of our residents. And we're seeing that in increased turnover. We've seen people leave the valley, people from our town family. And staff rely on cost of living increases to help them address inflation and the rising costs of food, rent, mortgage, transportation, and childcare. Again, the same things that our residents are facing. Included in this 2023 preliminary budget is the cost of living increase of 5.9%, and that is based on the Consumer Price Index for Calgary, June over June. So it is There's a bit of a lag in that calculation or in that timing, but that's what we've included within this budget. We did see an update just last week from the Calgary and Area Economic Outlook, and they're showing inflation currently at over 7%. So right now, it's still a number that's going up, but we're not sure how and when it will be impacted. So in 2024, we've included 2.6% for COLA, which is the forecast from that Calgary Area Regional Economic Outlook from the spring edition. Again, the fall edition is looking a little bit higher. But when we're looking at economists' reports, there is some discussion that that will dip soon. But because we have a lag, these are still appropriate numbers for us to include. We'll continue to monitor these economic outlooks and just keep you up to date on what's happening and what we're hearing. Historical reductions to COLA and performance pay that we've done to smooth tax increases have resulted historically in the need to apply market adjustments. And as Sally mentioned this morning, we did that in 2022 with your approval using part of the 2021 surplus. So what we'd found over several years, we do market surveys each year with comparative municipalities, but in cutting back performance pay, which allows employees to move through the grid, or in reducing COLA, which increases the whole grid in relation to inflation, we had slipped behind our market comparators quite substantially. And so we received your approval for those market adjustments. The impact of that in 2023 on the base budget is $394,000. Now, you may have seen this article in the Outlook. Pay raise coming for underpaid Town of Banff staff. Market adjustments that the Town of Banff is looking at for really similar reasons exceed $800,000, so more significantly even than what we have. But the Mayor of Banff is quoted in the article as saying, "We need to do our due diligence to attract, reward, motivate, and retain talent in this competitive market, especially when we understand Banff's affordability challenges so well." The same applies to Canmore. Same affordability challenges, you could argue maybe more, and the same challenges around attracting and retaining the staff that we need to deliver services to our community. Without the appropriate numbers and types of staff, we just can't deliver service. So that's what I'll say about that. The cost of benefits is also increasing. Both Canada Pension Plan contributions and EI contributions are increasing, which are, again, an uncontrollable cost for us, and we are also seeing some increases on the health benefit side. It's just that inflation running its way through really through that whole budget. We'll talk a bit more on Thursday about fire rescue staffing in the departmental overview, but just wanted to draw your attention to the plan that you had approved in last year's budget, which is supporting incremental staff increases in the fire department. The plan that you approved last year is what's included in this status quo budget, and Scott will walk through that again a bit more on Thursday, but just wanted to draw your attention to that. And then the slippage that I talked about earlier. In addition to these human resources related items, we've mentioned that several new positions are included within this preliminary budget, and I'll just walk you through those now. I hope you can see it. And you have it on your sheets there. It might be easier to read than up on the screen. These positions are required to address existing service levels and growth that we're seeing. Okay? In 23 and 24, these aren't new services. Again, they're just the resources required to continue to deliver our current levels of service. I will walk you through all years of this plan because we mentioned in the summary this morning of your options a couple of positions that show up later in the plan. So I just wanted to do it once as a whole. Now we have grouped positions by funding source, and you'll see that not all positions are funded from taxes. On the last page of the summary that's in your binder, you see that we have 200 and, what's the number, Robin? Sorry. $220,000 to fund positions from taxes, which is less than a 1% tax increase. With all of these other new positions for 2023, we have another funding source. So I'll just walk you through them. And property assessment and taxation, we're looking to increase by a half FTE, simply to address increasing numbers of tax rolls and the work it takes to prepare tax notices and assessment and respond to those questions. And it's just strictly a volume item. We're adding administrative assistant on the human resources side. Sally spoke briefly to that this morning. We are seeing significant increases in recruitment. What we're trying to do here is take all of the administrative tasks that are spread amongst the HR team so they can focus on doing that recruitment work, and we can have an admin person focused on doing that work, creating some capacity within their team. They, like really most of the corporate services departments, don't have any administrative support, and so it's the people doing the work who are doing the admin. At some point, you reach a tipping point where that just doesn't make sense anymore. And in IT side of things, we have a junior desktop support specialist. That was in the plan that you approved last year. Again, really to deal with volume, but also to formalize our approach to cybersecurity. That is a huge risk for us, and really if something were to happen on that side, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars of cost, and so it's a necessary thing for us to advance.
Ms. Rogers,
Yes.
how does a junior desktop support help with cybersecurity?
They will be managing training programs around cybersecurity and also doing field kind of level testing where they're sending out testing. We've done a little bit of that earlier this year, so they're kind of checking in on the pulse of how we're doing from a cybersecurity perspective. The manager of IT oversees all of that, but this person will be responsible for that sort of on the floor, on the ground
Like auditing
update.
type roles?
Auditing, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
From a revenue source, we are looking at converting 2 seasonal municipal enforcement officers to 2 full-time municipal enforcement officers, and this is on the paid parking side of things. What we're anticipating there is that our paid parking fine revenue will actually offset the cost of those officers. So that becomes a cost neutral, and in fact, we are anticipating seeing a little bit of revenue on that side. So a good example of having more people to be able to administer a program, actually paying for the program, helping pay for that program. On the water utility side, we're looking at funding an additional half-time position to support utility billing. That was brought in-house from EPCOR last year and is funded through the utility. Okay. And then another reserve, or I guess final reserve funded positions that we're looking at go back to the development reserve that I referenced just a few moments ago. And you had approved at the time that the development reserve was created through the end of this calendar year, a development planner and a development engineer. That work continues, and that funding is available within that development reserve fund to continue to support those positions moving forward. And so again, that really helps address this lag in timing that often exists. We get development fees up front, but sometimes the work doesn't happen until a following budget year or sometimes even later than that. And so the way we were managing that in the past didn't actually allow us to address the volumes appropriately. And so this reserve is working, I think, well in the way that we had intended. Included in that this year, as well as a portion of a parks planner. On the development side, there is quite a bit of work that needs to be done as it relates to parks and trails and open spaces. And we haven't had that position, and we're seeing some challenge with that. So we're funding that position partially from the development reserve, but also seeing some reductions in contracted services in both parks and in engineering, which is how we were kind of managing that work in between. So it's a tax neutral addition for us. Any questions about 2023? Moving on to 2024. So again, we've split these depending on tax supported or other. In 2024, we are expecting our new fire station to come online, and with that, we'll need the addition of a facilities supervisor. It's that tipping point that Sally mentioned this morning, where we can take on extra work, and at some point it's too much, and then we need an additional staff person. And in this case, the new fire hall and the scope of that building is that tipping point to have a supervisor to help manage that facilities team. On the project management side, in facilities, we are adding a position as well to deal with management of the projects that we have, which we'll review with you in the capital plan. That position will exist in 2023, funded from business transformation capital project that exists. Previously approved, it's a WIP project from a previous year. And we're having that person help us on the project management office side, really helping formalize our approach to project management so we can gain some efficiencies across the board in how we approach project management. And that converts then to a full-time position funded from taxes in 2024. And finally, in 2024, we have a fleet coordinator, which we're showing as 80% funded from taxes and 20% funded from the utility, just based on the number of vehicles we have on the solid waste service side of things. And this really is about volume of our fleet and risk management in that area. The fleet is, again, it's grown beyond what's capability of a person to manage, and we really need designated and dedicated resources to manage that fleet.
So that's the same person, those last
Same
two?
person, just funded in two different ways.
0.8 FTE up there and 0.2 FTE down below.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if it was more confusing to say 0.8 and 0.2, but it's one position, 80% funded from taxes, 20% funded from utilities. Yeah. I can adjust that actually. Okay. Then moving into 2025, we have a recruitment coordinator. So we're anticipating, again, continued growth and volume of recruitment. We will likely have maximized any efficiencies we'll get from our administrative assistant in the next couple of years. And then it's just volume that we need to be able to address. And you'll see that again in 2026. We are looking now pretty far out, and we're making our best guess based on what we know today. But again, those positions will come back to you when the budget for 2025 and 2026 is approved, and we'll have more information. What we're expecting at this point is that we're going to need that. Looking at adding a half administrative assistant in protective services to support paid parking and the growth that we're seeing on that side of things. A financial analyst in the finance team to help with budget and being able to expand our ability to manage variances and report to you on what's actually happening throughout the year. And then the communication advisor that we spoke about in the options list this morning, and looking at taking on the work created from some of the options that we look to bring online then. That is an option that council could consider bringing in earlier, depending on which priorities you advance. It's one of those positions where we say, if depending on when a priority happens, if you want to bring the priority forward, we may need to bring the position forward to support that. And then in 2026, again, just looking at growth, recruitment coordinator, and then another half-time property tax and utility assistant, just anticipating continued development, which results in increase in tax rolls, which is more work for utility billing and for preparation of tax notices. All right, I'll pause there. That's the staffing update. If there are any questions.
Therese, how many municipal enforcement officers do we currently have? I'm trying to remember that number.
This one I would reference more in the number of parking ambassadors we have.
Okay.
Just because that's where the conversion is. So currently we have 4 seasonal positions.
Yeah.
And 2 seasonal positions would remain. 2 would be eliminated or used, that funding used to fund 2 year-round full-time positions.
Okay, all right. I was trying to figure out if it's going to like 4 to 6, or is it like 4? Yeah.
2 year-round, except for the peak season when there'd be 4.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Also facing us is some additional expense on the debt side of things. So we are taking on debt for the fire hall in 2023, which we're expecting our costs of borrowing to be at $300,000 in the operating budget. The other piece impacting debt is just the higher costs of borrowing. We have assumed an interest rate of 6% in this preliminary budget, but until we actually sign the debentures that we take, we don't know what the exact cost will be for that borrowing. But currently the cost is just over 5, so we put in a bit of a buffer and assumed it at 6. And we will be bringing, again, a bit of an analysis next week when we talk about capital. We include always in that conversation a debt review, and we'll try to share with you then, to our best ability, the impact over the longer term of increased interest rates on the borrowing side. Go ahead.
Ms. Rogers, can you remind me what the total debt we're taking for the fire hall is?
7-ish? I think it's 7.
7 million? Okay. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.
Just for perspective there, our entire debt portfolio, all the debt we have, is at 3.2%, from the oldest to newest, whatever, and right now we're looking at 6 or more, so perspective-wise.
Right.
Yeah. What's unfortunate about this is that debt will then stay with us at that rate for the life of the project, like the life of the debt, the life of the loan, so. And you'll notice on your reports in 2024, the number comes down slightly. We have some old debt coming off the books for the current Arts Place building, or what at that time was the library. So that debt falls off. So the number dips slightly from an increase perspective.
Mr. Rogers, following up on the fire hall conversation, does this budget take into account the old fire hall and what we may or may not do with that? Or is that not a consideration yet?
Not yet, because that decision and information isn't available yet. So that would be something that we would come back to council with, a series of options and what the impact of those options might be, so that we can make that decision. Yeah, but nothing's included in that in this budget yet.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, so a number of things happening on the reserves front, some in the form of draws, some in the form of contributions, or both, depending on the reserve that we're talking about. So as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, we're recommending another $600,000 draw from tax stabilization. That was included in the budget for 2022 and was part of the plan moving forward for 23 and 24 to help smooth the impact of RCMP contract increases and the changes to the fire staffing model that we're seeing. Again, the development reserve, so we're contributing any surpluses to that reserve at the end of this fiscal year, and then we're proposing drawing from that reserve to fund those positions that I just reviewed. So a planner, an engineer, and part of the parks planner. On the photo radar reserve, we are drawing funds to support 1.5 RCMP officers, as well as a variety of community and safety programs. On the transfer inside, though, we are seeing some reduced contributions to the photo radar reserve, really primarily due to decreases in fine revenue. Some of that from the fine revenue that the province took a chunk of, but some of it because we're actually seeing less fines. So it's a bit of both, yeah. Transfers to and from the Art Trust are both about maintenance of public art, but also our new approach to public art funding, and we are assuming public art grant program will be finalized in 2023 and then implemented in 2024. So. The transfer that you see to the paid parking reserve is after costs to administer the program, and then a portion of the transit requisition have been paid. And again, you'll hear a lot more about that on Thursday. So I won't spend any more time on that one today. And then, as we've said a couple of times, transfers to asset rehab and flood mitigation. So you'll see an increase there of $250,000. $200,000 is an increased contribution to the asset rehab reserve and a $50,000 increase to the flood mitigation reserve. And we do still have that gap in funding that we talked about. And so really on our books for 23 and 24 is revisiting that long-term financial strategy and saying, okay, if it is in fact the appropriate strategy, then how do we actualize it? Or based on what we know since we've put the strategy in place, how do we need to adjust our plans moving forward? Very briefly, capital. So we actually have 2 days in your schedule to review capital. We have about, at the end of December 31st, 2021, we valued our assets at over $382 million. That will have changed with what's happened throughout the year. But really the capital budget prioritizes asset management projects related to maintenance or required upgrades to our assets. There's other projects related to supporting existing programs, and then some projects that speak to your priorities. But one of the things we do need to keep in mind is that our infrastructure is aging, and the need to continuously fund life cycle maintenance is a priority, and we do see some gaps in funding beyond 2025. So we have been able to fund the 23 and 24 capital budget largely. These numbers don't include any of our D projects. We do have a couple of unfunded projects, but the picture gets harder to fund in the later years of the plan, which again, we'll spend more time reviewing with you when we go through capital. Okay. And section 6 of your binders, the big chunk that you see in there, is our partners and affiliates requests. And so really what we ask you to do there is to review those requests. Let us know if you have any questions. We do not have scheduled dates for affiliates to come and present to council. They've been coming to you with their presentations really throughout the year, but we're happy to circle back if there are any questions that you have. Partners and affiliates receive the same budget direction that you gave administration, which is taking that status quo approach, looking at the same inflationary and cost of living factors, and these are the requests that they have built and put forward.
Ms. Rogers, I know I'm having a foggy brain day, so help me. TCK is not on this list. Do we not fund them?
Go ahead.
My understanding with TCK is that we take 12% of our business registry revenue, and it's a fixed amount, so it's not a funding request per se. It's a portion of our business registry revenue.
So it doesn't show here, but it shows somewhere else.
That's correct.
Correct.
It'll show in the ECDEV operating budget. They don't make a formal requisition where they have a submission in the same way that these groups do.
Right. Thank you.
That's it. Yes.
Is this number for BBRH recent? Okay, it's gonna be higher. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can get you a number, a working number.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
All right.
That's
that's
right.
in effect.
Yeah, so we don't have any ability to influence or set. We take their requisition and then it goes right onto the tax bill. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, Rick, at some point, could you, I feel like the requisition for operations for CCH has been pretty static over the last decade. I think last year there was a $25,000 reduction, maybe the year before as well. At some point, could you just give me the broader picture as to what their operating requisition has been over the last decade? I don't need it right now, I just need it. I want to make sure that that was clear. Like, I'm not looking for that now, like, at some point when you have a moment.
Yeah.
It just got really quiet, and I was like,
Yes, so
you know,
happy
I
to
wasn't asking
answer
for that
questions.
right now, right?
So
I don't
that's,
even get service at home like that, so.
Steve's coming out of Berk's ears.
I need your little.
so that's the,
That is the overview, yes, so please,
okay, so here's what I heard.
yes,
If you take the uncontrolled expenses and third party, COLA, HR adjustments that come really from catching up from COVID and responding to the COLA increases, and debt servicing. Those 4 items is a 13.5% tax increase, which means everything else, all the additional revenue, all the additional expenses, results in a 1% decrease in the budget. So that's what this budget's all about.
yeah,
Uncontrolled expenses, COLA, catching up from COVID, and debt servicing. And then everything else is actually a reduced budget.
loosely, yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
have a debt servicing question.
yes,
Was it not prior to last year that we got a preferential rate from the province?
Oh, reverse.
Like we could borrow money at like a lower interest rate through the provincial government, right?
yes, their program changed in 2020, and that went away. They said they could no longer afford to provide that same level of discount as a lender, that their expenses were too high. Yeah.
I think we should include that in the downloading list.
Yeah, great.
So that's the only thing I got at this point.
Because isn't now we're basically, they're on parity with, they have parity with the banks. It's the same lending rate as the banks, there's nothing preferential anymore. And we discovered that, I believe, when we were trying to look at borrowing for the fire hall.
Yes, yeah.
And that's when that came out,
Yeah,
right?
that's a great point. We'll add that to the provincial downloading.
As of the last update, which was just a week ago, it's 5.5% for our, 20-year loan, so
Right.
it's not much difference,
What's a 15-year loan worth?
roughly the same.
Same? So there's no, I guess I was wondering that because some of the debt that we're gonna take on, is it worth, because you take that on, that percentage for the entire life of the loan instrument, if there's any benefit in reducing it shorter term, but it doesn't sound like there is. And I know you're supposed to right-size the loan to the asset, I get that, but I just thought maybe there was a benefit. But maybe these are the new days of interest rates, these are the
Yeah.
new numbers.
The thing with taking it to the province is it's locked in, right?
Yeah.
You're paying that for the 20
Yeah, that's
years,
the
right?
point I was trying to make.
You're not renegotiating in 5%.
Well, yeah, that's the point I was trying to make, is that if you maybe got it, say if it was a 20-year loan and we got it for 15 years instead, it might come down substantially, but it doesn't sound like it does.
No.
No.
But it will require us to look at loans a bit differently and making sure we're taking the debt from
Yeah.
the right place. I mean,
Are there
we looked at
things-
FCM, right? We've
Yeah.
borrowed from them. So it changes our picture for sure.
Is there any benefit at all of looking at traditional lending institutions as opposed to the government? Because the numbers are the same. Is it just the length of time that the numbers are borrowed? Like maybe on shorter term loans, it might be worth, I don't know nothing about nothing. Like that's your scope of.
Yeah, we haven't done that in the
Expertise,
past, but for
but
sure it's
like
something
if
to look
it's-
at.
Yeah.
Like if we get more flexibility with like a Bank of Montreal or a TD Bank and say,
Yeah.
okay, fire hall 20 years, but we're doing well, and maybe we could dump it down to 18 years.
I wasn't even thinking about dealing with those 5, because those aren't actually giving competitive rates. I was thinking more like other lenders, like the higher end lenders. But yeah.
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 Regardless.
So, yeah, just shop around. Is I think the theme there.
The timing of taking said debt could be strategic over the next while, however. We're going to see interest rates climb for a little while longer to curb this inflation, and then we'll probably see them swing back in the other direction in a year or two. So, those are
Yeah,
Like a bridge loan? Kind of
bold
bridge debt?
predictions, but not taking debt now might have savings in the future.
Yeah. Some of the challenge with that is just the timing of the projects we have coming on, then when we actually need to take the debt. And so our borrowing bylaws, the MGA is really clear in borrowing that you can't actually start a project until the borrowing bylaw has been approved. And so it takes away some of our flexibility on that kind of a thing. When privately, you might start the work and then wait out to see if interest rates drop. We don't have some of those options available to us because of the advertising period for borrowing, which is really that the residents have an opportunity to comment on borrowing before we actually start the work of a project. So the system eliminates some of our flexibility there, so.
But we could purposely delay certain projects.
We could,
If we're
yeah.
thinking rates are going down in the near future.
Have you got a crystal ball that I don't know about? Yeah, no.
Just on that, I think for 2023, the main capital project we would be taking debt for is Pump House 2, which needed to be upgraded 5 years ago. So I don't know that that is one that we could put off, and it is utility funded as well.
We also have to realize that, I mean, the increase in our proposed debt servicing over 2023 is $300,000. So how much pain do you cause to save $300,000? Or actually just a portion of that?
It wasn't necessarily clear in our presentation, but the actual fire hall debt of the full $7 million is actually split over 23 and 24. So we've kind of done it cash flowing wise versus last year's budget, we had the full amount in. So it really should be 600,000, you know, if we took it all this year. And that's how we normally would do it. It's just the way the timing of the FCM loan is why we budgeted it this way. So it's spread over 2 years versus the one, but we are committed to it. So.
Other questions?
I wanted to ask about the potential for grant funding or using federal funding like the Federal Infrastructure Bank. I don't know if, I just assume we look for grants for all our projects and then apply for them, or we're looking at grants and then applying for them if we think we could do projects like all the climate change stuff that's come in front of us, and then the the public safety stuff, those grants. But we used to have a grant coordinator, Ron Deems, I remember, who specifically had a role around trying to find leveraging grant funding. And I just potential.
Yeah, and generally we're seeing less grants available, both at the provincial level and at the federal level, but that's absolutely part of our process is to review. I'll let Whitney jump in.
No, you were answering. I was just going to wait till you were done. I would say generally when we look across departments, particularly when you look at, well, not particularly, two examples I would use would be engineering and sustainability. They have a pretty good handle on the grants available both federally and provincially that are available to them. One of the challenges that we have, and Rick can probably speak to this more financy than I can, but with some of the grants, and I was thinking particularly the ones we've used in previous years for some of the solar panels on like the rec center or Elevation Place, the Municipal Climate Change Action Center grant was kind of, we needed to have the project approved by council and ready to go before we could apply for the grant funding for it. So we couldn't put a budget amount in that assumed the grant would be there because we didn't know. So we had to budget for the full amount and then hope for the grant would follow. So that's another complexity in looking at budgeting with the grants that are available to us.
Yeah. As well, Tanya, back in those days, and that was actually a long time ago when Ron was here, the grant structure was very different. There was a whole, that's even before MSI, or MSI was just starting, and they amalgamated quite a few smaller grants and the administrative of it to bring in MSI and a few of the other ones. So it's, the whole red tape part of it is different now than, and that was 13, 14 years ago when Ron worked here. So.
I would love to spend other levels of government's money first.
We try.
And are there any other questions? That's a lot for a high-level overview for today. That's pretty much everything that was on our agenda. We did want to just, I had mentioned briefly this morning, this idea about working with the biosphere on formalizing our agreement a bit. So wanted to see if anybody had any questions, or we can certainly discuss that later as well. But then otherwise, we have handouts to put in your binder for council to review before the next finance committee meeting, which is Thursday at 9. Councillors Graham and Faubert, we will put those packages in your mailboxes. But if there's any other comments or questions before we wrap up, otherwise, we'll be back at it on Thursday. Are we good? I'm just making sure. Everybody's good? Okay, then we need to, oh, go ahead. See, there's always somebody.
I was going to say thank you for letting, for being patient with us on the screen.
We really appreciate sick people staying home, so happy to do it. I know it's less than ideal, but I think you all have done a good job too of just interjecting when you have questions, so keep doing that if you keep being sick. And then otherwise, we'll just have a motion. I'll make a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee. All those in favor? That's it, carried unanimously.